Welcome to Technology Comparison's Crashcasts. I'm your host, Sheila, and today we're diving into an exciting topic, Memcached versus Varnish. Joining me, as always, is our tech expert, Victor. Hey, Victor, ready to cash in on some knowledge?
Hey Sheila, always ready to store some information in my mental cache. And speaking of caching, that's exactly what we'll be discussing today.
That's right. For our listeners, to get the most out of this episode, it would be helpful to have a basic understanding of web servers and databases. Now, let's break down what we'll cover today. We'll start with an introduction to caching, then dive into Memcached and Varnish individually, compare them, and finally discuss their real-world applications.
Sounds like a great plan, Sheila. Before we jump in, how about we start with a quiz question to get our listeners thinking?
Excellent idea. Here's the quiz question for our listeners. On average, what percentage improvement in page load time can a website expect to see after implementing a caching solution? A, 10 to 20%, B, 30 to 50%, C, 60 to 80%, or D, 90 to 100%? Think about it, and we'll reveal the answer at the end of the episode.
That's an intriguing question, Sheila. It really highlights the impact caching can have on website performance. Without giving away the answer, I think our listeners might be surprised by how significant the improvement can be. It's one of those optimizations that can make a huge difference with relatively little effort.
Absolutely, Victor. Now, before we dive into Memcached and Varnish specifically, could you give us a quick overview of what caching is and why it's important?
Certainly. Caching is like having a convenience store near your home, instead of always going to a supermarket far away. It's about storing frequently accessed data in a place where it can be retrieved quickly. In web applications, this often means storing data in memory, rather than fetching it from a database or computing it again. This can significantly speed up response times and reduce the load on your servers.
That's a great analogy, Victor. So how does Memcached fit into this caching landscape?
Memcached is like the shelves in our convenience store. It's a high-performance distributed memory caching system. It's primarily used to speed up dynamic web applications by alleviating database load. Memcached stores key value pairs in memory, which makes it incredibly fast for retrieving small chunks of arbitrary data.
Interesting. And how about Varnish? How does it differ from Memcached?
Great question. While Memcached is like the shelves in our store, Varnish is more like the store clerk who remembers what customers usually buy. Varnish is an HTTP accelerator designed for content-heavy dynamic websites. It acts as a web application accelerator, also known as a reverse HTTP proxy. Varnish caches HTTP requests and responses, which makes it particularly good at caching entire web pages.
So, if I understand correctly, Memcached is more about caching specific pieces of data, while Varnish caches entire HTTP responses?
Exactly right, Sheila. Memcached is great for caching objects like database query results or API responses. Varnish, on the other hand, sits in front of your web server and caches entire HTTP responses, including headers.
That's fascinating. Can you tell us more about when you might choose one over the other?
Absolutely. You typically use Memcached when you need to cache specific pieces of data across multiple servers. For example, if you have a social media platform and want to cache user profile information to reduce database queries. Varnish, on the other hand, is excellent for content-heavy websites where you want to cache entire pages or API responses. It's particularly useful for news sites, e-commerce platforms, or any site with high traffic but relatively static content.
I see, so it really depends on what you're trying to cache and how your application is structured. Are there any particular challenges or pitfalls to be aware of when using these technologies?
Great question, Sheila. One of the biggest challenges with both technologies is cache invalidation, knowing when to update or remove cached data. As the saying goes, there are only two hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. With Memcached, you need to be careful about what you cache and for how long. With Varnish, you need to set up proper cache control headers and purge mechanisms to ensure users aren't seeing outdated content.
That sounds tricky. Are there any best practices for handling cache invalidation?
Absolutely. For Memcached, it's often good to use short expiration times for rapidly changing data and implement a system to update the cache proactively when data changes. With Varnish, you can use techniques like cache tagging and ban expressions to selectively invalidate related content. It's also crucial to have a good monitoring system in place to catch any issues with stale data quickly.
Thanks, Victor. That's really helpful. Now, I've heard that Varnish has its own configuration language. Can you tell us a bit about that?
You're right, Sheila. Varnish uses a domain-specific language called VCL, Varnish Configuration Language. It allows you to define how Varnish handles requests and caching behavior. It's quite powerful, but can be complex for beginners. Memcached, on the other hand, is simpler to set up but less flexible in terms of caching rules.
Interesting. Before we wrap up, do you have any fun facts or anecdotes about these technologies?
Sure. Here's a fun fact. Varnish was originally developed by the Norwegian national broadcaster NRK to handle high traffic during major events. As for an anecdote, I once worked with a company that implemented Varnish and saw their server load drop by 80% overnight. It was like magic. Suddenly, their infrastructure could handle much more traffic without breaking a sweat.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, to help our listeners remember the key differences, let's use a simple memorization technique. Think of M for Memcached as morsels of data, and V for Varnish as viewing whole pages. Memcached caches morsels of data, while Varnish caches what you're viewing.
That's a great mnemonic, Sheila. I'm sure our listeners will find that helpful.
Thanks, Victor. Now let's reveal the answer to our quiz question. The average improvement in page load time after implementing a caching solution is typically between 30 to 50%, which is option B. However, in some cases, it can be even higher.
That's right, Sheila. It's quite remarkable how much of a difference proper caching can make.
Indeed it is. To summarize today's episode, we learned that Memcached is great for caching specific pieces of data across multiple servers, while Varnish excels at caching entire HTTP responses. Both can significantly improve performance, but they're used in different scenarios and come with their own challenges, particularly around cache invalidation.
Excellent summary, Sheila. I hope our listeners found this comparison helpful in understanding these two powerful caching technologies.
Thank you, Victor, for sharing your expertise, and thank you, listeners, for tuning into Technology Comparison's Crashcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a rating. Your support helps us continue creating informative content. Until next time, keep caching and stay tech-savvy.